Alright, now let's talk about color. So what I'm going to talk about in this part of the video here is kind of split between the physics of color, what actually is color to our eyes, and I'll talk about the visual art aspect of color, which will be hue, saturation, and value. So color, of course, are all the colors of the rainbow that we see. And when we say rainbow, what we're actually talking about in scientific terms is what's called the visual light spectrum. So if you see on the left GIF there, you can see red, you can see yellow, green, blue, right? Very sharp, distinct differences in color. But if you look on the right GIF, you can see a lot of different hues in there. It's a more smooth transition between, okay, where is the red turning into pink, turning into purple, right? It can be very smooth. And the reason why that is because scientifically, the colors we see are all different parts of light. So if you've seen this kind of prism before, we have a white beam of light, which contains all the colors that we see, from red all the way to purple or magenta, indigo, violet, whatever you want to call it. It would be violet. Once it hits this prism, and what a prism does, it's essentially just a piece of glass that slows down light. And when light enters, it slows down and it breaks apart into our rainbow. And essentially what light is, in this case, light is a bunch of waves, right? And you can see all those waves forming in each color here. So if you're looking at red, those are very long or slow waves. It's a very low frequency light. Whereas if you go down towards violet, it's very sharper, quicker waves, or very high frequency light. So it's essentially frequency, how quick these waves, these light waves are going up and down, which shows us color. And of course, this is just our visual spectrum. Light has even more properties, slower waves below red, which is what we call infrared, right? If you've ever heard that, infra means below. So frequency is lower than red. We can't see them with our eyes, but those light rays are still there. And then we have above violet or ultraviolet, right? Have you ever heard of ultraviolet light from the sun, right? When we have sunscreen, that UV protection, that stands for ultraviolet light. We don't see ultraviolet rays, but they're there. Okay, so that's essentially the quick version of what light is scientifically, or colors are scientifically. It's how fast the light is oscillating, or how fast its frequency is. Okay. Same thing with rainbows that we see in the sky, or with mist, right? That mist is acting like a prism. It's slowing light down, and that's why we can kind of see that rainbow effect happen. It's the same thing as this glass prism, except we're using water to slow light down. Okay, so what I'm going to do to demonstrate what light does in photography and those three different terms that I said earlier, hue, saturation, and value, I'm going to go into Lightroom, a photo editing software, and play around with this picture that I took of a man and his bike. Alright, so here we are in Lightroom. Here's this picture. What I'm going to do is go to the color settings. I'll get rid of everything else here. And we're going to take a look at our color mixer box right here, sort of in the middle. So in Lightroom, it has an option where you can adjust the colors, each color of our spectrum. So here we see a very bright red bike, or deep red here. We see trees in the background, which are green but have some yellow tones to them just because of how bright they are. The sun was shining on them. And we're going to see some other colors that kind of poke out. In this case, it's going to be the leather. Even though we know that this leather is black, just the way that the light is hitting it, it's very bright. We're going to see some blue tones in this leather, and we're going to play around with those. But let's start with red because we see that easiest. we can either just choose red here, or we can take the target crosshair, and here we choose red, it automatically goes there for us. So we're all good. So we have our three options here. We have hue, saturation, and in this case, Lightroom calls it luminance, but it's usually called value if you're talking about it just from a visual art standpoint. So hue is essentially what color are we looking at. Here it's a pretty, very red. We know this is red. It's not really orangey. It's not really pinkish, right? But if we wanted to see what hue does, I'm going to drag this slider to the left, and we're going to start to see it is definitely not red anymore. It's definitely more pink, and we're going even further pink towards this color. So this is what hue is. What actual physical color are we looking at? And oppositely, I can move this way, and now we're definitely not looking at red anymore either. So hue is essentially what color is it? If I took this photograph and I got the lighting a little bit off and it didn't look as red as it did in real life, then I could move this slider around to try and see, okay, what red is this bike actually in real life? Maybe it's something more like this instead of this. But I got the lighting pretty well done, so it is red here. What I'm going to do is actually use this target hair tool and go up here to the trees, and you can see it actually selected yellow. Even though we know trees are green, just the way, like I just said, the lighting in the background's a bit overexposed, so it shows us some more yellow tones. So maybe I wanted to correct for that with hue. If I drag this more towards the right, or more towards green on the rainbow, right? Now we can start to see, okay, maybe these trees are looking a bit more green now as opposed to like yellow green. And now it's even a bit more of a deeper green. So if this is what they looked more like in real life, something more maybe around here, maybe I'm just trying to correct for that. What color are we actually looking at? And of course, if I go left, it'll go more towards orangey a little bit. And lastly, like I said, we can see in our leather here, usually it's supposed to be black, but when I click on this, it goes to our blue. And we can really see that this does have blue undertones if I start moving this hue towards green. Because if I move this towards green, oh, now that leather looks very green. And if I move it back, yeah, we see that it's got a lot of blue in it. Just like if we move it towards purple, right? Now we can see, yeah, that's definitely some purplish leather there compared to blue. Okay, so that's what hue does. Let's go back to our red so we can see what saturation does. So if we know that hue is what color are we looking at, saturation is how much of that color is there. How red is this red? Of course, since we see this red is a very vibrant red, if I add some saturation to it, it just it does make it more red, right? Like if you had like a pencil crayon red, that's red as it gets, right? But if I took out saturation, I'm taking out the red, right? So it's still red, but I'm kind of taking it out. And as you go even further left, you're taking all color out of it and turning it more towards gray. So you're kind of making it more of a soft red or just completely gray, neutral. Let's see what that looks like with our trees up here. So if I add saturation, we're basically adding more of whatever that color is. So we're adding more of that yellow-green to it, right? Now if I change the hue, you can really see that, yeah, this is a lot more green and this is turning a lot more orangey red, right? And same as before, if I take down the saturation, look how lifeless this is looking. Look how much of the greens and the yellows I'm taking out. Or I guess I'm really only taking out just the yellows. And now it's looking a lot more gray. And same thing with our leather. Let's just say, wow, I really don't want to have a lot of those blues in that leather. I can take down the saturation and now it looks a lot more gray. And now it's very gray. Or if I'm like, yeah, let's make this blue leather. I add all that saturation. Now you can really see the blue out of it. Lastly, we have luminescence. luminance. And what that does, let me go back to red, is it changes how bright or how dark that color is. So if I take the luminescence down on red, luminance, wow, look how much darker that red is now. I'm making that red a dark red, closer to crimson, blood red, all the way to very dark. Oppositely, I can make it a very bright red, bordering on pink, right? It makes it a lot brighter. So how dark is it? More of a crimson red or more of a light red? Do the same thing with our yellows up here. Make it a lot darker yellows. Yellow-green, right? Or brighter. And same thing with our blues. Do we want to make those blues darker blue? Which in this case is just making it look a lot more black. Or lighter. And we can combine all of these three things, right? We can turn the saturation more gray to get rid of that blue, and turn the luminescence down to make it look more like black leather. If our trees, if we want to make it a bit greener, we want to bring the luminescence down a little bit just to kind of show that it's green, add a bit of saturation, whatever we want to do. We can combine all three of these, and this is how we see the colors that we see. What color is it? How much of that color do we actually see? And how dark or how bright is that color? Hue, saturation, value, or in Adobe Lightroom, luminance.